Welcome to 4G, Episode 3. Today, we're going to talk about the Bema seat. It's one of those items at the end of, near the end of history, as we know it. It happens right after the rapture of the church. In Episode 2, we talked about the rapture. Today, we're talking about the Bema seat. So what is the Bema seat? Well, think about it this way. You were born naturally at one point and were given certain gifts, talents, and abilities. And then you were born again, if you're a Christian, and were given some new gifts, talents, and abilities. So, or at least spiritual gifts. So during our lifetimes, we are accountable for what did we do with what we were given. And it is especially true for after the time that we come to know Christ as our Savior. We are accountable. And we all have this innate sense that that's true. This is the justification for it. This is the proof of it. So it's called the Bema seat. Why the Bema seat? Well, in first century Israel, first century Roman Empire, the Romans were big into games and contests of races and that sort of thing. And in the stadium, in the Colosseum, there was a seat where you could see the whole track. You could see how the race was started, how the race was run. Was there any cheating going on? Did they maximize their gifts, talents, and abilities or not? So that's the idea behind the Bema. It's that special seat that Christ has for all of our lives to see how are we running our race and what are we doing with what we've been given. So we begin here in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. So there's a day coming, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, when all of our works will be on display before Jesus. And they are said to, the picture here is that they'll pass through some kind of refining fire. And there'll be different levels of rewards for different levels of service. But the takeaway from this verse is there is a day of accounting. God will hold us all accountable. And the day that's discussed here is the day that we stand before Jesus at the Bema seat. And so our works will be scrutinized, shall we say. And then Paul goes on to say, he says, if the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he'll receive a reward. Well, Paul told us back in verse 10 that the foundation is Jesus Christ. So we are to build on what Christ has given us when we were saved. So if anyone's work he has built on the foundation and survives, he will receive a reward. So that sounds like a fair deal. If we did the right things with what we were given, we'll receive a reward. And by the way, the idea of surviving there has to do with surviving the fire. If you pass gold through fire, it melts. The impurities come to the surface. They're drawn off. When it's cooled, it's even more pure. So that's the testing fire of Christ. And then verse 15 says, if anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. The picture here is not one that we ever want to experience, but it's somewhat of a hypothetical. If everything you've done with the things you've been given by God, time, talent, and treasure, if everything you've done with those amounts to nothing, you're still going to be in heaven, because we are not saved by our works, we're saved by grace through faith. So the good news is there's opportunity for great reward. The bad news is there may be no reward, and you shouldn't think of that as something like, oh, that's a great consolation prize, at least I'm in heaven. That is true, but that's not the disposition of somebody who really knows the Lord. And then in Romans, Paul wrote this, so then each of us will give an account of himself to God. We have this innate sense within us that God keeps records. He does. At the Bema seat, it'll be disclosed as to what we did with what we were given. We don't want to have to stand there and shrug our shoulders. I didn't do anything with what you gave me, Jesus. It will be a shameful time. So that's the Bema seat. It's a time of evaluation of the believer's works. It's not a test to get into heaven. It happens in heaven. So there's nothing to worry about there. If you like my content, please like this video, share it, subscribe if you want to. Costs you nothing, and it might help get the word out. God bless you all.